Bet Sharukkin, The Son of Perdition by Alan Bonk. Chapter 21. Thy Kingdom Come. East of Jerusalem, a great portal opened in the sky, turnpike of marvelous spiritual activity. The angel turned to the news crew and told them that the same things that are happening in their area were also happening in 5 other portals around the world. Everyone below in Petra can only stare up to the heavens, awestruck. Sean looked up. "What is it?" The angel answered, "That's Jacob's ladder." All these portals will be used by God's host. When the armies from heaven reach the surface of the earth, they become Joel's army and fight on earth from point to point. Jesus and his bride will come first here to Petra, Edom, then to Jerusalem. They all looked up. There were now billows of fire unfolding around the opening in the sky, and lightning firing off continually around the host. This lightning was of all the colors of the rainbow, not at all natural. At the center of the host were a multitude of people riding on horseback, wearing white robes, the bride, with a single horseman leading them from the front. The angels and the host, the armies of God, began pouring through. They came down swiftly and with purpose, creating streaks of light trails flowing through the sky. Their bearing was from east to west, and they appeared to be tracking directly to Petra. The rest of the heavenly hosts which followed were angels, seraphim, cherubim, and ophanim. There weren't just a few thousand angels. There appeared to be millions. They were spreading out in every direction and had obvious assignments to accomplish. The angels traveled like lightning from point to point. The skies were lit up with their presence. All of this had the earth lit up brighter than noonday. There was also a deep rumble coming from within the earth. When the heavenly army reached Petra, the horsemen and host came down inside Petra from overhead. There was some time of silence for Paul's troops outside the entrance to Petra. They did not know whether to run or just hold their ground. Maybe this army was part of Paul's forces. They didn't know. Suddenly, the blockade at the entrance of Petra, the 4-story high concrete wall, exploded from within and then dissipated into nothing. Not even smoke was left. The heavenly army blew through the opening like wind, led by the Lord of the hosts, the elect one, Jesus. Paul's troops began to fall backwards at the Lord's presence. Then everyone outside Petra, which had Paul's mark, the mark of the beast, were killed. God's angels were gathering the spirits of the slain as quickly as they could and leading them away. The heavenly army, without hesitation, turned north and proceeded towards Jerusalem. Back in Jerusalem, Paul and his officers saw the heavenly display. Knowing that he had only moments to get to his stronghold, he scrambled down into his bunker, almost missing a step. Paul feared being killed by a sword. He went towards his table, still covered with his plans and maps and everything. His face was wet and flushed. His hands trembled as he answered a phone from his field general. "Sir, request to pull back. Sir, please. Request to pull back. Please," the field general begged. Paul stammered, "Stand your ground." Then Paul cut him short. Paul's forces were in disarray. The general barked orders, but it was drowned out by the thunderous gallops of the horses. A young Assyrian soldier, one of thousands, froze in fear where he was. He tried to hold up a missile launcher towards the heavens, but before he could even pull the trigger, a mighty heavenly warrior swung his sword swiftly through him, releasing the young man's spirit from his body. The heavenly army attacked Lucifer's pitiful demons, and his angels were dropping in obeisance to God's army. Lucifer's angels had actually lost their battle to Michael, the archangel, and his angels several days earlier in heaven. Paul lost more composure by the moment, mumbling to himself and attempting to control his tremors. Meriden approached and acted concerned. "Paul, oh my God, you look pale. I have to check your blood pressure." "Can't you see I don't have time for this?" Paul said. "Please let me help you. The last thing we need right now is for you to have a stroke," Meriden insisted. As Meriden leaned over Paul, he drew out a 10-inch dagger from inside his sleeve and plunged it into Paul's chest. Paul flinched, as if pricked slightly by a small needle, until his face contorted. Meriden got up and revealed Paul clutching his chest. Paul looked up at Meriden in shock. Meriden laid Paul on the floor, face up. "Paul, you become an animal, a beast. And when animals go rogue, we put them down. I'm so sorry." Meriden spoke. "Meriden," Paul whispered. Paul briefly looked up from the floor and saw Father Ibrahim attacked by several of Paul's generals. Paul's eyes flickered, slowly losing their focus. Father Ibrahim's lifeless body was now lying on the floor. Paul convulsed. Then suddenly, a host of demons jumped out from his mouth, like frogs abandoning their host. Complete darkness. Paul felt himself being lifted up. He opened his eyes once more. He looked down. This time he saw his own body in a pool of blood. He looked to see who could be holding him up. He was startled to find two of the biggest and strongest angels he'd ever seen, hoisting him by his arms. He tried to struggle from their grasp, but they took Paul straight up and out of the bunker. They emerged into the air outside, and just outside the temple complex. Paul gasped as he looked out on the city. All the structures, which had been built by men, had become rubble. The people were gone. Only the Temple Mount and the temple remained. The Mount of Olives had been cleaved in two, and the Lord of hosts, Jesus himself, was standing at the temple. This time, he had not come on a colt. This time, he had come to conquer. The angels took Paul into the wilderness, about 50 miles northeast of Jerusalem, to a location called Duda-El. Flying in the Spirit, they approached the Al-Safa lava flow. Paul's breathing quickened. He yelped as they swiftly dived towards the center and through the jet-black surface. They descended into the earth, and after a moment they slowed to a stop. They were in a vertical shaft, disappearing down. There was no light at all, except that which the angels were putting out themselves. The angelic escorts placed Paul in chains. There were now 4 more angels who went down before Paul, while another 4 angels hovered right in front of him. "Arise and see Paul Bet Sharukkin, the man who destroyed the world, who was worshipped as a god." The angels down below him were sounding horns and shouting. Paul was then lowered down to their level. They stopped. Then he saw them, the spirits of the dead. They came to the edge of the pit to see Paul. They were grouped by their nations and families in compartments inside the walls. Their compartments were completely without light, but Paul can still see their faces, contorted and angry beyond belief. The dead shouted, "Is this the man that destroyed the world? He's just a man, and just as weak as we are. Come, join us. Please, please, put him in our cell." Paul turned his face away, but there were more shouts and curses from the opposite side of the pit. Then the angels presented Paul to another group in another cell, and they traveled down further into the pit and repeated the process again and again. Each level down, the spirits became more vehement than the last, until every person in hell had an opportunity to see Paul in chains and cursed him. Finally, the descent was over. Paul looked up at them. His face was devastated, and there were tears streaming down his face. The angels spoke to Paul. "You will not have the pleasure to join your people in their compartment, because you have destroyed them." They continued further down, even deeper within the earth. Then they hovered over a large magma lake. Paul screamed and cried as they slowly approached it. He writhed against his chains. Paul turned to see Father Ibrahim in chains being put into the magma right behind him. Then the angels pushed him in to the lake. His blood-curdling screams echoed, never-ending. End of chapter 21.